The first question has come in from Richard, and he's asked, why do soft things absorb sound?
Why do soft things absorb sound? Great question, Richard. So, when we are producing these vibrations that are sound, we're talking about the atoms and the molecules themselves vibrating. And what we need is that vibration to get passed from one molecule to the next, to the next. In a solid thing that is very hard, it's a bit like a Newton's cradle. So if you imagine those desk toys where you've got the hanging balls and you pull one up and you drop it, and then the one at the other end flicks out and then it drops back down and flicks out at the other end. That's how sound is passed from atom to atom or molecule to molecule. The energy passed from one to the other. In a soft substance, what happens is that vibration, rather than immediately getting passed to the next molecule, the whole substance itself sort of compresses a little bit and then expands again. So the vibration still happens, but a bit like trying to hit against a wall, you'll get a sharp knock. If you try and knock against a sponge, for example, rather than actually getting that nice clean transfer of energy from what is one vibration, which would be your knuckles striking against the door, you kind of get everything slowed down because the energy is used up compressing, squashing that material, rather than directly sending the vibration to the next thing.
Are you ready for your next question, Andrew?
I'm ready, yeah.
Okay, so our next question comes from Garth, and he asks, with hearing loss and hearing aids, why is it much more difficult to hear the direction of arriving sound? And can you comment on noise cancellation?
Ooh, that's a good question. So with hearing aids, the way that the classic hearing aids that are worn on the outer ear work is that they are basically a microphone and speaker system. They are a microphone and speaker system. So they are detecting the sound that is around you and then feeding it directly through a little speaker into the ear at a louder volume, so that someone whose hearing isn't as sensitive can actually still pick up that sound. The problem with that is that speaker is always in exactly the same position. It's where it's placed on the hearing aid. So you are no longer actually receiving sounds from different directions to your ears, which limits your ability to tell the specific direction around you. If you have a hearing aid in both ears, you would still be able to get the rough direction from one side to the other, because the sound will reach one hearing aid before it reaches the other one, but you'll lose the sensitivity about whether the sound is coming from a slightly different angle behind or in front of you. Noise cancellation systems are very clever, and they're becoming more and more useful. I think we probably all appreciated them a little bit on calls like this. So this is a computer system that is monitoring what sound is coming into the microphone, and you will always have an array of background sound. So if you were to actually look at the sound waves on a computer, if you were to draw them up on a screen, you get lots and lots of wiggly lines, each one showing a different sound. So you would be able to see, hopefully my voice would be the biggest and highest wave, but there would be the background noises of me moving against the desk, maybe if something drives outside. That sound is going to be much more muffled and quieter, so it's going to be a smaller line that on the graph wiggles along at the bottom. What the computer can do is then create a threshold. It can say, right, anything that is underneath this threshold, this limit, it doesn't go over it. What I'm going to do is actually not send that to the speaker in your laptop or your phone or whatever you're watching on. So you get rid of that kind of background hustly noise. Okay, do we have a live question? Would anyone, hands up, anyone like to ask a live question? All right now. Isabel, do we have another one from the comments?
We do, but I think possibly, was that Linda with a hand up, a gentleman on a screen named Linda, was that you? I'll just unmute you, sir, if that's all right. Sorry, you just need to unmute yourself. You're still talking, but we can't hear you, I'm afraid.
Sorry, it's Colin Chipperfield here. I'm using my wife's login, that's all. Yes, Andrew, do low frequencies travel further in water, for example, whales and communications with submerged submarines, etc.?
Yes, so lower pitched notes do tend to travel further, which is not so much It's the frequency, is also the amplitude, so that it's that sort of bigger vibration is less easily cancelled out. If you've got something that is vibrating very, very quickly, any kind of other vibrations that are happening, so if you're talking about underwater, the water molecules are just naturally flowing and moving around on the surface. We would see those as currents or waves. So these very fine, high frequency vibrations are easily kind of mixed up and messed just through natural flow. Whereas if you've got a very sort of slower, much more single thing, that signal, as it were, is much easier to detect. So that allows it to travel further and be picked up further away. For humans, we hear the lowest frequency we can hear is about 2,000 vibrations every second. But elephants can hear much lower. So this isn't just something that whales, cetaceans, submarine equipment uses, but actually land animals as well. Very low. We wouldn't even be able to hear it. We might feel it if we were close enough to the elephant. We might feel it as a kind of rumble, and our ears wouldn't be able to pick it up. But because it is, there's a sort of greater gap between it, we don't lose that information, as it were. So that's why they can travel further.
We've got lots of questions in the chat if you're ready for another one, Andrew.
Please.
So this is one about, do you have any advice for getting the sound on an MP3 player or phone to the right level so it doesn't damage your hearing, particularly when, for example, cycling?
Yeah. So one of the rules that the European Union has for devices that play out to headphones is that they actually have a volume limit set on them, which is to prevent just this, is not to have sounds that are too loud going into your ears and actually causing that kind of damage. So because we're in the EU or we're in Europe and we receive products from there, generally everything is considered fairly safe, even though I would recommend that you keep things around, well, I'm not a doctor, I shouldn't make recommendations, but I'd say if you're kind of around 75% of the device's volume, then you're going to be pretty safe generally. While cycling, I mean, perhaps a safety thing to consider is obviously you need to be able to hear sounds on the road. Our eyes as animals face forwards, but while we're doing things, things can come from behind us, cars could come up from behind us. So if your brain is trying to focus both on whatever music or podcast you're listening to, but you're also trying to listen out for cars, you might miss other background noises. So if you're out cycling, it might be best not to have music on, unfortunately. But if you do, I would keep it down even lower. In that case, I don't think it's a hearing damage issue, or perhaps a safety issue.
Okay, we've got another question from Roger who says, I've just moved into a new home built with lightweight joist and wooden floors. So this is like living inside a drum. What principles should I apply to sound passing through floor to floor?
Yes, so with the wooden joists and the floor suspended on, exactly as you say, a bit like a drum. Often in new builds, what we have is insulation. Some kind of insulation within the walls or under the flooring. And so the question earlier about why soft things absorb sound, because that energy is used up compressing the material rather than being directly passed through it. A lot of insulation looks like a kind of meshy, netty, foamy kind of stuff. And that will be put hopefully within the walls or under the floors, and that will actually help limit the sound transfer from one room to another. Older houses are usually more problematic because we didn't have that kind of insulation in there, and so the sounds will travel more easily. If you do find that sound is traveling between rooms too much and you're wanting to think about how you can change the way that your room itself is decorated, is laid out, soft furnishings will help. So if you have big settees and chairs, things like that, beds with bedspreads on, because these are all soft materials, they're going to absorb that vibration and they're not going to then let it through the walls into the rooms around you. If you ever watch any videos, you ever get to go into a recording studio, you'll see that they've got a kind of egg box like foam often on the walls, which is used to baffle the sound. So it's a foam, so that it absorbs it, but then the shape of it also kind of matches the vibrational wave shape to kind of mess it up and stop that sound vibrating. If you wanted to really make your room at home as soundproof as possible, if you were, say, building a little recording studio for yourself, you can actually use egg boxes. You take them all together and then put them up against the walls. You'll find that you massively reduce the amount of sound that travels both into and out of the room, so you can keep everything much quieter.
We've got another question from Angus, which I also want to know the answer to, who wants to know why the hairs inside your ear break. Sorry, Angus. When some of the hairs inside your ear break, you can still hear things.
You can, yes. There's thousands of these hairs inside our ears. So whether they are broken just through usage over time as we age, or they've been damaged because of a loud sound, they can't be repaired, but we're usually not damaging all of the hairs in one go. So there are still functional hairs still in our ear, and it's unlikely that we'll ever completely damage all of them, which would be complete hearing loss. But the more that we lose, the poorer our hearing will become. So again, this is why you want to avoid these excessively loud sounds. You might experience a very loud sound once and not notice any difference in your hearing, but if you were to experience that loud sound repeatedly over and over again, then slowly you would degrade. And I say slowly, but much faster than it would if we weren't exposed to that sound.
Well, thank you for answering Angus's question, and a thank you from me. I've got another question come in from Helen saying, when sounds are louder, do sound molecules move faster?
They don't move faster, no. So louder is our amplitude, so it's how far that each vibration is, but the actual wave traveling through the stuff, through the air, through the water, isn't moving faster. The vibration is just bigger. So you need more energy to achieve a bigger vibration, but that vibration has to happen within the same time. That's why it sounds louder to us.
Great. The next question is from Garth, which says, is the use of sonar significantly damaging to sea life?
Sea life does suffer from sound underwater. Sonar, to my knowledge, and I can't be 100% sure on this, I don't think sonar has a significant impact on sea life, but I could be wrong. But one of the things that is actually quite a problem are the engine sounds of boats, which is more in the realm of the hearing range of a lot of these underwater creatures, particularly things like dolphins and whales. So one of the problems if going out on these whale spotting boats or dolphin spotting boats or passing over coral reefs is that the noise of the motors actually disorientates the sea creatures. So that's actually, to my understanding, that is a bigger problem for sea creatures than the use of sonar. We're also using a lot more engines than we are sonar equipment as well, which obviously increases the impact of the engines versus sonar.
And I've got another animal-related question here, which is, how do bats use ultrasound so accurately to catch insects?
Excellent, yes. So, ultrasound. Ultrasound is defined by our own hearing. So this is a sound that is too high-pitched for us to hear, too many vibrations per second, so over 20,000 vibrations every second. Bats are able to make this, they basically kind of yell out into space, and that sound wave spreads out in front of them, and it will bounce off things. So I mentioned in the video about the echo. That's what they're listening for. They're listening for an echo. It bounces back off, say, a moth, and back to their ears. Now, we had a question earlier about the hearing aids and the loss of understanding which direction sound is coming from because of them. Bats are incredibly good at using their ears to determine the direction that the sound is coming from. And the way that they're doing that is they have one ear on each side of their head, like we do, so they can tell if it reaches one ear before it reaches the other. We can do the same. That's how we tell direction. We're not consciously aware that they can. And because of the shape of their ears, they've got a much better idea of specifically behind versus in front, where that sound is going to be coming from. The sound is usually going to be coming from in front because they have shouted it out, and they will usually keep their heads in position, looking forwards as they've emitted that sort of squeak sound. Their ears are also slightly different levels. So ours are pretty much on a plane. So we're not too great at telling whether sound is above or below us. If you have your ears slightly off, you can start to tell that. That coupled with a bat's incredible kind of flying agility means they can pinpoint the direction of something, and they will keep squeaking. So they'll keep sending out these sound bursts and listening to them. So they initially might realize that there's something sort of in the distance in that direction, and they can sort of head towards it. As they get closer, they're going to be able to get more and more accurate on its specific location. And that will allow them then, with their agility, to hopefully catch their evening meal.
Great. The next question is on a completely different subject. Peter is asking, how do silencers work on weaponry? They've always interested me since reading about them in a book.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah, how do silencers work on weaponry? What they're doing, the suppressors, is baffling the vibration, the sound. I'm not actually entirely sure how they're doing that. We call them silencers. There is a little bit of debate as to really whether that's a good name for them. They're sort of more impacting the crack of the gun itself rather than the bullet. But just by keeping it in line, giving it that extra distance to travel through in the gun, with the silencer, I believe, has a honeycomb type structure inside of them, or some of them do. And then those vibrations, the air vibrations that are being passed as the bullet moves, get absorbed inside that silencer. But there's lots of different types, and I have to say I'm not an expert on that one, I'm afraid.
We've got lots of questions still coming in, so I'm going to try and get through as many as possible. The next one is from Christopher, who is saying, going back to noise cancelling, I have heard of Contra Waves being the inverse of the noise in question. Have I been misled?
No, there are ideas of being able to cancel out a sound by playing, as you say, a kind of contra sound opposing to it. So this would be if you've got one frequency and your vibration is going side to side, say you want to then play one that's sort of going perfectly opposite, which means that you kind of cancel out the overall effect. So that's one way of doing it. There's a really interesting airport in, I think it's the Netherlands, I want to say, where what they've done is around the airport, they've got this lovely park area, and they've built what look like kind of mounds, a bit like a henge kind of structure, but on a huge scale around the airport. And the distance between each of these kind of little hill mounds is equal to the sort of amplitude, frequency, of the types of sound that come from the aeroplanes, which is a similar kind of thing of baffling this vibration that is happening by having something perfectly in the way of it. So if you can counter perfectly what the vibration is doing, you sort of neutralize it, and therefore reduce the ability to hear it.
Thank you. So the next question is, how do cochlear implants work?
Cochlear implants, yes. So we spoke about the hearing aids. So they are the speaker microphone system. A cochlear implant is quite different from that. So for some reason, if your cochlear isn't working, i.e. it's not sending the electrical signals from those little hairs to the brain for whatever reason, a cochlear implant will actually replicate those electrical signals. So you're in fact kind of bypassing pretty much all of the inner ear structure that I spoke about in the video, and there is something on the outside of your head that will be detecting the sound, and then the cochlear implant is an implant. It's actually inside the body, and it's linked up to that audio nerve that's leading to the brain and is feeding in electrical signals. Technology is ever improving, but as yet it doesn't mean it's not as good, not as perfect as replicating the human, the complexity of the cochlea itself. But we have gone from being able to allow someone to know there's a noise there to actually quite detailed, fine sounds. And as technology improves and they can link better and better into individual nerves within that nerve bundle, we're actually able to give people better and better hearing back through something like a cochlear implant.
So I've got another hearing related question here, which says, are there any other things other than loud noises that cause damage to the hairs in the ears? What about damage from ear infections, ruptured eardrums, etc.?
Absolutely, yes. Force, any kind of force, if you knock your head, there is a chance. If you imagine having a bottle of water and knocking against the wall, you see all the water sloshing around inside. If you were to knock your head for any reason, the fluid inside your cochlea is going to move. Potentially that force will also damage those little hair-like structures. Ear infections are dangerous, so a burst eardrum. Our eardrum, as I mentioned in the video, is a way of transferring vibrations from the air into the bones and eventually into the cochlea. But it's also a barrier. So even though our ear canal is kind of inside our head, you would still consider it external. So if your eardrum gets torn, bacteria can kind of get from the outside inside, and that can cause ear infections. Usually with antibiotics, things like that can be sorted out and the eardrum will heal. But in some circumstances, that infection can spread. And then if it gets into the cochlea, it's going to start damaging the living cells in there as well, which will potentially result in hearing loss. So there's lots of different ways that we can damage the cochlea. But you know, if we try and keep ourselves safe and don't listen to the loud sounds is the kind of key one that's going to damage the cochlea. Any kind of infection is very serious, and you would need to go to the hospital to deal with that.
I think we've got time for just a couple more questions, Andrew. So this one is from David, and he asks, why does hearing loss affect certain frequencies to different extents?
Great. So there are different thicknesses of these little hairs in the cochlea. The thicker hairs better at picking up the lower frequency notes, and the thinner hairs better at picking up the high frequency notes. I explained in the video why the lower is better, the thicker is better at lower notes, and the thinner at higher notes. But depending on what sound has caused the damage to the hairs, if it's a loud sound, it's going to have impacted a certain thickness of hair with greater impact than the others, which means you would lose your hearing more at that kind of specific frequency. With the kind of natural loss of hearing, it's the thinner hairs that are more likely to break because they're thinner, they're more delicate. So we tend to find that human hearing actually reduces in sensitivity at the higher frequencies first, and sort of works its way back down. So they had a thing a few years ago when I was a teenager. I remember it was, I think, just launched. They called it the mosquito. They decided that they didn't want teenagers hanging out around certain places, so they would play very high frequency notes that the young ear could pick up and would find very annoying. People would hopefully decide to leave. But people a little bit older whose hearing had already started just to drop off a little bit wouldn't be able to hear those types of notes. When I was doing a paper round, when I was very young, someone had a similar thing for distracting cats on their front lawn. They didn't want cats on their lawn, so they had a motion sensor. And at the time, I was young enough, and it was really annoying when I was dropping off their paper because it would squeak at me. It was awful. But no one else could hear it. And I probably can't hear it now either, which is a shame.
So our final question is, why is there no sound in space?
Why is there no sound in space? Classic. So there's no sound in space because there's no stuff in space. We've talked about how the vibrations need something to pass through, these atoms, these molecules, be they in air or water or something solid like passing through the wall. There is no gas, liquid or solid in the vacuum of space. So there's nothing for that vibration to travel through. If you were in your spacesuit and you have oxygen because you're inside your spacesuit, you will be able to breathe, you would be able to speak, which would be fine. The air in your helmet around you, the vibrations would pass through that. You would probably make the helmet itself begin to vibrate, but then there's nothing on the outside of that helmet. So that helmet's moving backwards and forwards, vibrating, but there's nothing out there for it to knock against. So it can't go anywhere. So the only way in space for you to be heard, if you're an astronaut, is to have a radio. You need to send some other kind of signal, an electromagnetic signal, which can pass through a vacuum. But no stuff in space, so no sound.
Brilliant, thank you so much. I think that's all we've got time for today, so it's a big thank you from us. Is there anything else you'd like to say?
I'd just like to say thank you to everyone for coming. I hope you learned something both from the video and from the Q&A, and it was interesting. You had some good questions there, a couple of ones maybe panic internally, but I hope I could share some good stuff with you. There's hundreds of other sessions. I've been having a look. There's hundreds of other sessions at the Alumni Festival, which has just gone up on the screen. So I would really recommend having a look at what else is happening over the next couple of weeks. If you still have our website open where you watch the videos, you can scroll down to the bottom. There's a few questions and some challenges if you want to do a bit more sonic science. So some things you can do at home. You can send in an email to us. Let us know how you got on. We are hoping to be open to the public again in October half term. So keep an eye on our website for what's coming up and have a browse around the website. There's loads of things for you to get involved in, activities you can do now, ways you can support us if you've enjoyed today. But otherwise, I hope you have a fantastic Sunday afternoon, and hopefully I'll see you all again soon.